Welcome back to Witch Church. It's Mal, and I'm here with my good friend, the astrologer Antje Sommer, and we are here for the April 2025 Big Three episode. If you've been listening along on the Big Three journey, you know these episodes are me and a astrologer guest talking about the most important top three transits of the month ahead, plus the new moon and the full moon. So I'm super excited to dip our toes into April 2025. It's going to be a big month of energetic and elemental shifts for sure. But before we get into the forecasting, I want us to hear all about Antje. So, Antje, tell us your big three. And then also, can you give us a little backstory of how you became an astrologer?
Yes, so my big three are Sagittarius, Sun, Capricorn rising, and a Taurus moon. But I have a Sun Neptune, so the Sagittarius is a little bit watered down. And I'm very happy to be here and to talk with you about the month of April, which is really after like this huge firework we are experiencing right now, another pretty intense month, which is laying a lot of the ground, energetical shifts we are going to experiencing this year. So I think it's really great to be with you today. I started to study astrology in 2013 after a long career in the music business. I've worked for a record company for over 10 years, and I was getting really sick and tired of being bullied around by older men. So I really wanted to have a career change that was more meaningful and more sustainable. And also it was a time when I became a mother. So I needed to really find something where I'm flexible and not away all the time, which I was in my prior job. So yeah, I started studying, and I really was fascinated so much in the beginning that I could not imagine to stop. And because of my moving around, like I've lived in London, I've lived now in New York, but I lived in Paris and Melbourne before that. I became very interested in astrocartography. So that's one of my specializations that I started to explore about 3 years ago. Yeah, you can imagine I'm having 4 planets in Sagittarius and a very big 9th house. So traveling has been very important for me. And I love to explore with my clients where in the world they can put down roots or find peace and quiet, or advance big in their jobs, etc. And there's always a reason why we are pulled to certain countries energetically, and it's really fascinating how accurate and deep astrocartography is. And yeah, then another big passion of mine since last year is the midlife transits. I believe that midlife is the most powerful time that every one of us is going through between 35 and 45. So it's really great if you get the knowledge to what's to expect it, because it's a really intense time. And I wish I had more knowledge back then when I experienced those years, because they were very profound in changing me as a person a lot. And yeah, and that's why I created this program online. And in April, I'm going to host a retreat in Tucson with my dear colleague Lisa Vorman. where we're gonna, dive into a full weekend of, sound baths and yoga and astrological wisdom in a group setting. So I'm very excited about that.
Oh
Mhm.
my God, that's amazing. And yeah, guys, if Anja is the ultimate Sagittarius, she has so many stories about all of these wild places and experiences. So I can just really see how well, both astrocartography and the midlife transits would be kind of your specialty. So we'll of course have all of your information in the show notes so the listeners can find you. Your business name is Brooklyn Astrology.
Exactly. Yeah. I
Okay.
should have mentioned that.
No, no, that's okay. And but one more thing too, we're talking about all your Sagittarian travels. Do you consider Berlin your hometown, or where in Germany is your
I was growing up in the north of Bavaria, so
Okay.
in South Germany, in a very rural area. So that's really my home, I would say, although Berlin has been my home for 15 years and, I have a lot of friends there. But my real home, I would say, is still the South. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know we got to get into the transits, but just one more thing I want to ask you is um in Germany growing up, was astrology something that was culturally like discussed, or what was that like?
Um, I know that, I mean, it was prior to social media and phones and everything. So the only way you would like find out about astrology would be in magazines and in books. I had my first Liz Green book about the planetary, let's say, compatibilities in my teenage years.
Okay.
So I would read that with my girlfriends when we had a crush on someone. We would look up and try to find out when their birthday was. But it was only really otherwise known in those sun sign columns in magazines.
Yeah.
So it wasn't very, I it wasn't really a big thing back then. I would not say that. No.
Mm, okay, that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, cool. Well, I'm so glad to have you on here, and we can kind of jump in. Something you said in our preparation for today was that we're kind of coming from reverse or retrograde water into direct fire in April. And I thought that was really astute. And I think that's kind of the theme of the month ahead, how we shift from this deep water, kind of almost like a whirlpool or an undertow in the ocean. And now we're getting washed up onto the land, and the sun is shining on us. And like, there's something there kind of coming in. And our first transit is kind of piggybacking off of something Mandy Ray and I ended on last month, which is that Neptune will move into Aries on March 30th. But even though this technically happens end of March, I think it really sets the tone for the beginning of April. So we're almost naming sort of Neptune entering Aries as one of our kind of big three moments. I want to know your intuition and perspective on just such a huge transit. And I know it can be hard to find words almost when we're discussing Neptune. But yeah, tell us a little bit about your perspective on Neptune into Aries.
Um, I really think that we're we've kind of been in a lot kind of beauty sleep for at least a year or so. And like energetically, particularly the last 2 or 3 months have been very slow. And Neptune in Pisces I think, brought up so much illusions and disillusionment, you know, particularly in the social media area. So one aspect of this shift, I am hoping at least, will bring some new forms of how we are connecting spiritually, because Neptune is the planet of dreams, spirituality, transcendence, illusions. And being in Pisces for like 14 years, this was a time where astrology became huge. I mean, you know, all the, you know, podcasts and, you know, astrologers like entering the social media space has been so massive, and it hasn't been that way ever, probably, in the just in the amount of popularity astrology has, you know, become. Uh, um, you know, it has been massive, and I think that there are probably some areas where astrology, you know, or astrologers, you know, especially with TikTok and, you know, some social media areas, you know, have promised things that they in fact could not deliver to the audience. So I personally hope that, being an astrologer, Neptune in Aries will bring a new, bold version of spirituality that is authentic, that is honest, that is truthful, and that is, you know, also more pioneering, even, if that makes sense.
Ooh, I love that you brought that up. Yeah, because you're exactly right. Neptune and Pisces, there's a little bit of a I don't know, like a projected God complex where we're like scrolling on TikTok and then someone is reading tarot cards and they're like, stop, this message is for you. Like, your ex is coming back. And, you know, and we like listen to it and we're like, oh my God, it's a sign. And
Yeah.
it's like, wait, no, it's not. Cause um no one is your God. You are your own God. And our spiritual leaders, um, you know, should encourage people to find that autonomy in themselves instead of, I think, making people dependent on their kind of toxic messaging, which can kind of be Neptune and Pisces, right? It's the illusion of, ooh, this person knows more than me, or this person has a direct phone number to God and I don't, so I should listen to them, you know?
Yeah, and I think that I hope also that people realize that you really, when you trust someone as being your astrologer, which I feel is, you know, very similar if you trust a therapist, just that the astrologer usually gets a session maybe twice a year or a year. So the importance of what you say is so much bigger and has a weight. You have a responsibility. And I feel with Pisces, and I hear this over again from clients, that they had this and that experience. And I just hope, especially, I mean, we are having Neptune in Aries right now, but we are having also Saturn coming along in the summer. So we are having another, you know, push into this Aries domain. And with Saturn there, I think there will be like, okay, let's get this in writing. Let's, you know, get these rules up and running. But what I'm also pretty excited about with Neptune in Aries is that I looked at prior cycles, as particularly the last one when Neptune was in Aries, which was 1861. And yes, there were a couple of wars during that time, not only the Civil War in the United States, there were two major civil wars in China. There was Bismarck and his strategic wars in Europe. So we need to really, you know, be mindful of that. So politically, I think we will see huge shifts, and they probably have some sort of, you know, Aries, the warrior energy in them. However, what I'm really looking forward to is groundbreaking new forms of art, new forms of music, the way that people connect spiritually in a more authentic way. Yeah.
Total. Yeah. Yeah. It's yeah, I really feel this on a deep level. So I'm glad you brought this up. This isn't something that I have discussed with anybody. You know, I've discussed like the politics and the history of Neptune and Aries, but not necessarily the spiritual influence that Neptune can bring, and Neptune also being a planet that has its ties to like art, poetry, you know, how we express our really divine nature, because
Yeah.
Neptune says you are divine, you are a child of God or whatever. And you know, that can really influence how we're showing up in the world collectively.
One other thing that I want to mention is that when Neptune was in Aries last time, there were also groundbreaking new ideas and philosophers coming up, which Karl Marx, you know, Marx and Nietzsche, for example, Germany, the founder of like the revolutionary founder of the nihilism. So basically telling you we don't need to believe in anything. It doesn't make any sense, which was absolutely groundbreaking for that time. Um, so I think that because it's also a completion of a 165-year cycle, it is like the push, and that's the same what we experience now in Aries season in the spring, the push to something new, to something that is building up, without fear, without like, you know, fear of conflict, or, you know, it's a very fresh and go-getter energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that we really need that, because a lot of people are so tired about the status quo, about how society has been shaped over the last 20 years. So I'm really excited for change, actually. Yeah.
Totally, totally. And we have to remember, I always remember this, like I was thinking about this with Pluto moving into Aquarius not long ago, and with Neptune now moving into Aries. Our souls signed up to be here when
Yeah.
these things happen. So why did our souls sign up to experience this? So thinking about that too, because these shifts don't happen very often in our lifetime. Um, yeah, yeah. So that kind of takes us into, you know, that's the first sort of um, flash of fire, you know, at the beginning of April. We're sort of adjusting to Neptune being into Aries or being in Aries. April 7th, we just want to briefly touch on that Mercury will station direct around, it's actually around 26 degrees Pisces. So Mercury is kind of like Neptune in a way, moving from water. He's soon going to speed up into fire. Uh, and that also brings us to, well, before I move on to the full moon, anything coming to mind, Anja, with Mercury stationing direct on April 7th?
Yeah, before the station, it's gonna touch the North Node in Pisces, a couple of days prior. So we have like the North Node in Pisces has been pretty activated recently because of the retrogrades. And it's gonna, you know, it happens in the beginning of April, now again in the retrograde cycle, but then also at the end of April in the direct motion. So I'm really wondering what kind of news there will be around those days. When the Mercury connects to the North Node, it could potentially bring really important messages if you have anything big going on around the you know, the 27th degree of a mutable sign. That could bring personal, you know, important message that can be life-changing in your life. But globally, I would think that there will be you know, I will watch for news that are coming out in the beginning of the month. And then again at the end, because the same will happen again then in the direct mode on around April 24th. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you mentioned that because pretty much like Neptune has a discussion with the North Node in Pisces. Venus has had a discussion with the North Node in Pisces. Saturn is going to discuss something like Mercury now. Every planet who's going from Pisces to Aries in the next month or so has to have a discussion or a conjunction with the North Node. And I think when anything happens with the North Node, there is something fated about it. Like, I needed that piece of information to take the next step, which kind of feels to me Mercury in Pisces at the North Node. I'm also thinking about how Mercury, at least if we're looking at sort of the traditional the essential dignities, Mercury is in detriment in Pisces. So that doesn't mean that Mercury is inherently a bad communicator in Pisces. But I like to think that Mercury in Pisces is really good at kind of alternative languages. Like Mercury in Pisces is a translator of um, the language of astrology, the language of spirit, the language of energy. So the messages we are getting around April 7th might not be in English. They're in a sign, you know?
Mhm. Mhm.
That's how I
Yeah.
kind of feel about
Yeah.
this. Yeah.
Yeah. That's very true. It also can obviously pay attention to your dreams.
hmm
Dreams, meditation, the subconscious is very, very important to pay attention to. Yeah.
Yeah, good. Okay, I love that. And I guess that can take us into our next transit, which is technically the full moon in Libra. And funny enough, on the day of the full moon, we have our second planet of the month stationing direct, and that is Venus stationing direct at 24 degrees Pisces. So again, like Mercury, another planet stationing direct in Pisces, going to pass the North Node before they move back into Aries. What I find compelling is that April 12th, being the full moon in Libra, Libra is ruled by Venus. So the ruler of this full moon is Venus stationing direct. So I'll actually put the chart up in a second, Antje, but tell us a little bit about how you're feeling about that full moon.
Um, yeah, this full moon feels significant because of the change of direction of Venus being the ruler of this full moon. This full moon is also conjunct Chiron, which, you know, can bring an aspect of healing. Yeah. So the sun is conjunct Chiron around this full moon. So when we look at that from an overall perspective, I think we have the possibility not to only to heal something within ourselves or to let go. It's a full moon cycle, so it's a time of letting go. It's also the end of eclipse season. So this is the final lunation post eclipse. So we are wrapping up this 6 weeks eclipse season, which was kind of pretty intense, I would say. So I hope that there is also globally or in the news the aspect of healing, maybe things that have been decided or have been really disturbing over the course of March are reversed now that a lot of planets have moved direct. So that is something that I would hope for. Again, if you are having anything around 22, 2 degrees plus minus of a cardinal sign, this is a full moon to pay attention to. This full moon can be really healing and can, bring you a different perspective, or you are invited to, let go of, attitudes or behaviors that have held you back over this, especially over this very slow moving first quarter of 2025.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I wasn't thinking about Chiron, but I think you make such a good point with Chiron conjunct the sun at the full moon. And I'm also thinking about how there's such a poetry behind the full moon in Libra being ruled by a Venus that is stationing direct. It's almost like the illumination maybe of the final messages of the Venus retrograde cycle. And for everybody, Venus retrograde has been in both Aries and Pisces, which is the part of our charts this year that's just been getting kind of clobbered. Like everything's happening in that Aries Pisces house. And only just now in April can we kind of start to move out of that just a little bit, or at least more into Aries, less into Pisces. But I'm just thinking about like what Venus messages, what Venus lessons have been going on since Venus stationed retrograde. I'm blanking on the time period. Do you remember the Venus retrograde?
Station, I believe, started retrograding on February 23rd.
Yes. I was
It
going to
was
say
a 40-day retrograde period, which is about 6 weeks. And it started, let me see the degree. I have it here.
yeah, sorry to.
I believe it started at 9 degrees Aries.
Mm-hmm.
So the eclipse that just happened, by the time you're watching this video, the eclipse, Aries eclipse, solar Aries eclipse is happening on March 30th. So by the time you're watching this, you already have had an eclipse intense experience probably. And because both of the stations happened at the almost exact degree of 9 degrees of Aries, we will really see what this degree, and if you have any planets around 9 degrees, you will feel that.
Yeah.
Down.
Yeah. And this is now, I want to remind the listeners, last month, Mandy Ray made a point about the 9-degree thing. And then now Antje's making that point too. So it must be super important, I think, that our guides are like, okay, that 9 degrees Aries or 9 degrees of the cardinal sign, what's going on there? And yeah, I think that could be really important. Overall, too, I think the full moon in Libra, if we just kind of speak to it at a more general level, this is the kind of illumination point of not only our partnerships, like our romantic partnerships, but just like what others are mirroring back to us. Um, and sometimes I do this in my own head when I'm annoyed with someone. Like I'll be thinking like, they're doing this and they're doing that and they're so angry, or like when you're just kind of in that that kind of phase where you're just kind of stuck in that, um I don't know, like focusing on the other.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'll replace their name with I. So if I'm
Hmm.
going to
Yeah.
say like Johnny is so depressed and doesn't get up and do anything, and I'm frustrated with them, I might say, I'm frustrated with me, and
Yeah.
kind of like flip the flip the script a little bit, because oftentimes we see our problems more intensely in someone else. And
Absolutely.
that's kind of what this full moon reminds me of, especially now that we're talking about Chiron conjunct the sun.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I think this is definitely a full moon to pay attention to.
Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. Now, if we feel good about the full moon, we can kind of go into maybe the crux of this month. We were looking at
Yeah.
April 17th and 18th,
Yeah.
kind of maybe even as the most important point of this month in some way, because it's on the 17th that Mercury will move back into Aries and run into a conjunction with Neptune in Aries.
Hmm.
Um, on that same day, Mars will move back into Leo.
Yeah.
So we have two pretty significant things moving direct in fire. And I think particularly that Mercury moving into Aries and running into Neptune feels very interesting. Usually, I would say Mercury conjunct Neptune, ooh, there's confusion, there's careful what you say, or careful about the messages you're delivering. They can be kind of wishy-washy, but that's what makes Neptune and Aries so interesting, because I don't think it's as wishy-washy as a typical Neptune vibe. And that's not what I'm getting with the Mercury, Neptune, and Aries. Yeah, what do you think, Anja?
Well, it's going to be interesting because nobody of us living on this planet right now has experience with Neptune in Aries. So it's
Good point.
complete new territory
Hmm.
because even the even this position with Neptune in a fire sign is a contradiction even in itself, right? Because I was thinking about how this combination of energies can play out. I think it's not really straightforward, even so it's Aries, because Neptune might, there might be some personality that is, driven and fiery and pioneering, delivering a message that then doesn't get um, received in the way the person wanted to. Like there can be a lot of confusions even from people that would, deliver it in a very direct and honest way, but just with Neptune there, there can be a lot of like misunderstandings and things that don't make any sense if the you know, if you want to. So I'm really curious how we will experience that that time, but also so my, let's say, my fear with this Neptune in Aries time is that people blindly follow risk takers and pioneers and people with new ideas because they're ready for something new. But there can be still this illusion element we will still have with Neptune, right?
Yeah. Totally. Like, I'm thinking just about the key phrase for Aries, which is I am. So we have Mercury and Neptune meeting in that frequency of the phrase I am, but there can be some disillusionment with that phrase. And I'm thinking, actually, it's such a gift because yesterday I had a client who has Mercury opposite Neptune in their chart. So I just got to kind of experience someone with Mercury-Neptune. And to be honest, they're like the one of the wisest people I think I've ever met. I'm thinking like this person must have been like a Sufi mystic in a past life or something. Like the way they are able to communicate the universal energies and speak these truths that just are so profound. Yet, I was thinking that probably can't land on everyone.
Yeah.
So it's kind of similar to, I don't know, like a prophet, someone delivering a message from God or whatever. Historically, sometimes the prophet is followed, but then sometimes the prophet is demonized because not everybody will digest the information the same.
Yeah.
So there's just something about what really is the truth and who's speaking the truth and who am I going to follow. That feels very Mercury in Aries conjunct Neptune in Aries.
And I would also put a note in my calendar to meditate around those days, because this is the first conjunction of those two. And there will be most likely very interesting messages coming through that set you up for this huge new time in Aries. Because
Yeah.
Neptune and Mercury connections can make very lucid, can make very, can open your openness to the cosmos, from an intellectual level bigger. So I would definitely look at that from that perspective as well, and use some time to connect, I don't know, with, either a meditation with a candle, for example, lit.
Connect with the fire element.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Love that. Love that. Yeah, the ways we can connect with the fire element in a way that kind of calls back in fire, because we've been so in like the sort of swamplands as of recently. Like we need and I just thought, like, elementally it would be very hard to start a fire in a swamp.
Yeah.
So we're kind of, and it's very easy to start a fire in a desert. So like thinking about how we're kind of moving from the swamp to the desert a little bit.
Yeah.
uh, And also, guys, to remind you, on the same day, not only do we have this Aries transit, but Mars will move back into Leo. Um, and this is
Yeah.
interesting to me because part of this Mars retrograde has been in Leo. Uh,
Started. Mhm.
it started in Leo.
Yeah.
It started on December 6th, 2024. And I want us to think back to that time, really like end of 2024, like what was going on and how was it circling back now. And I'm thinking about Mars being direct and going back into Leo. There's a little bit of something like, I'm ready to resolve this. Uh,
And
I'm
also what I like is that shortly after that ingress, we are having the first Mars Neptune trine on April 19th.
yes.
So we are then invited to sort of take that either spiritual or creative aspect of the new signature of Neptune in a fire sign and incorporate this in our everyday, you know, life or the way we act. So that's another one that I'm kind of pretty excited about.
Yeah, I think if you are fairly astrologically savvy and you know your houses in your chart that are the fire houses, the Aries, Leo, Sagittarius houses, like meditate on those houses and see how those houses are wanting to move forward in some way. Yeah, yeah. Um, and that also then, if you feel ready, let's, while we're on Mars, let's talk about the kind of big transit that has been encompassing the Mars retrograde. And that was Mars opposite Pluto. So this would have happened beginning of November. Technically, Mars was still in Cancer, opposing a Pluto that was still in Capricorn at the beginning of November. So that was the first Mars opposite Pluto. The second Mars opposition to Pluto was the beginning of January. And now we'll have the third perfection of this transit on April 26th. So again, beginning of November, beginning of January, and now the end of April. There's that Mars Pluto theme that is coming up for resolution. Usually, the third hit of a transit has a little bit more to do with resolution. In general, Antje, what would you say about the combination of Mars, and Pluto? Yeah, what's your intuition on that?
Yeah, you can reflect back if around those dates, especially the early November date, um, if there was some sort of conflict or power dynamic or a situation where you felt powerless or a situation where you were in power, but you used your power in, not the best way, because Pluto can really bring also a little bit the dark side of people out. And with Mars Pluto, um, this is expressed often in a conflict, right? And that's not to say that you have yet you had a conflict. It really depends also where, in which houses you had that transit. But if you had, the likelihood that this topic came back on your radar in the beginning of January, is there. So now because we've also covered like 5 degrees. So wherever right now it's almost at 4 degrees of Leo and Aquarius. So it has evolved a little bit over the last couple of months, and there is a chance for either a resolution or some sort of peace or some sort of, finding common ground, even in a conflictual situation. So that can also be, by the way, depending on the houses, an inner conflict. It doesn't have to show up in the outside world. It can show up internally. So wherever you feel there was a big internal struggle going on around those times, you are invited to move on from that internal conflict. The beauty with the oppositions is that you can find a compromise. The oppositions are integrated in a compromised way, so you can find a middle ground. So yeah, it's going to be interesting because that's the weekend of my retreat. So I'm already interested how this plays out with the people attending.
Yeah. Oh, I love what you said about how in oppositions we can often find compromise or integration. And personally, I had so many conflicts in this Mars retrograde. And that could also be because I'm a Cancer rising. So I think this Mars retrograde being mostly in Cancer, really hit me really hard. But I think what was interesting is that I learned something about the way I approach conflict, like something about um a conflict totally came out of the blue. I wasn't looking for conflict and I wasn't trying to start it. It came out of the blue versus sometimes there were times when I was anticipating conflict and it did not come. Uh, so there was a little bit of like an ego check in this Mars retrograde, especially with that opposition to Pluto influence. Like you can run, but you can't hide from conflict in the sense that even if I am sinking back into a shadow side version of myself who wants to avoid conflict at all costs, because I'm so afraid of people being mad at me or thinking I'm bad or whatever. I can't avoid conflict. It is impossible. It is impossible in life to avoid conflict. And it will come even if I'm not looking for it. And there are times when I am in deep nervous system deregulation because I'm anticipating conflict, and instead a compromise arises. So we can't necessarily predict when conflict is going to arise as much as our egos want us to. And going back to your point too, internal conflict, the stuff we are fighting with within ourselves, often comes up because we're afraid of something on the external and we're holding something in, we're building resentment, or whatever.
Particularly with Mars in Cancer, those conflicts are very emotionally loaded.
Totally.
Mars in Cancer being in its detriment and being in a place where it's not super comfortable operating in general in a conflict, it's usually a little harder to resolve it because there's so much emotion attached. So you cannot think straight. You are in your own emotional bubble. So that's why having this opposition now in a fire and air oppositions, so to speak, I guess makes it a lot easier. Particularly because Pluto is now in Aquarius. So the Aquarius archetype helps us to sort of zoom out of the situation and to have a more objective view on what happened in the past.
Yeah. And that's the beauty of the maybe the quincunx or the inconjunct between Cancer and Aquarius. Like they can't see each other, but they can actually help mitigate each other's energies. So I think actually that you're so right that Pluto carrying um, that Aquarian influence and maybe trying to smooth over whatever did happen with Mars and Cancer. So now that Mars is in Leo at this point in the month, like it's like that opposition's trying to integrate some conflict that might have arisen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay. Wait, I'm actually looking forward to that opposition in a weird way. I never would think that I would look forward to a Mars Pluto opposition, but personally, I had so many conflicts during this Mars retrograde that I think some conflicts do need to sort themselves out a little bit.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. And I guess that brings us to the next day, April 27th. Our final transit is that new moon in Taurus, uh,
Yep.
which is exciting. And this is the second lunation of the month that is ruled by Venus. We had the full moon in Libra on April 12th, ruled by that Venus stationing direct. And by the time we get to the new moon on April 27th, Venus is, slowly but surely speeding up. Funny enough, on April 27th, Venus has just passed the final conjunction with Saturn.
Yeah.
So I'll put this lunation up on the screen, but I would love to know your reflections on.
So I think that what I like about this lunation, and again, we're not having, hang on, I have some. Oh yeah, there we are. Yeah, we are having the conjunction at 7 degrees of Taurus. Yeah, and Venus is approaching a conjunction with Neptune. Not quite, but it's moving towards that. That's gonna happen, I think, in the beginning of May. So Venus being the ruler of this and moving towards Neptune, I think will maybe blur some of your, either relationship topics or finance topics, blur them a little bit out. They might not appear to be very easy to grasp. However, I think it's generally a new moon that is, lit by fire, also because the Mars is squaring. The Mars in Leo is squaring that new moon. So that's another kind of signature that there can be conflicts lingering on the horizon. Right? So the good thing is it's well moved past Pluto opposition. So that's like kind of done. But and it's not quite a square yet, but it's moving towards a square. Otherwise, yeah, that's my, oh, and we have still, oh yeah, so Venus is kind of baked in between that Saturn Neptune,
Yeah.
with like they're all within 3 degrees. And that's kind of another huge signature of the year that we are seeing later, almost exact that conjunction. And you know, Saturn Neptune conjunctions are already kind of very frictional in itself, because both planets want completely different things. You know, it's like a conversation between, do I keep that structure, or do I build that structure, or do I dissolve that structure? You know, do I follow those rules, or do I, you know, just go with the flow and don't pay attention to any rules? So, you know, even if we look at that from that point of view, and Venus being baked into those two energies, that's gonna be a little bit of a wonky kind of setup, I would say.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Totally. I think I have to review my traditional Hellenistic rules, but there's a phrase that is called enclosure by the malefics. And it essentially would mean a planet is kind of trapped in between the aspect with two malefics. And even though the traditional astrologers didn't use Neptune, I would even say maybe in this case, Venus is enclosed by malefics in some way. You know, Venus is in this sandwich between Saturn and Neptune. And also, I guess we could factor in Mars, because she's going to make a trine to Mars in a second once she moves into Aries. So malefics are on all sides of Venus right now. Although, again, traditionally, Venus in Pisces is a pretty strong Venus. So I'm almost thinking about a really difficult, um, a difficult meeting at work. Mm-hmm. Where, let's say, you are the presenter at work, you're presenting a problem to your team, and everybody on your team is mad, looking for a conflict, and triggered. Mm-hmm. And if you're Venus in Pisces, you're trying to figure out, how do I harmonize us so we can work as a team again? And that's a lot of pressure on Venus and Pisces, but she's doing it somehow. And I think about how fundamentally Venus wants to harmonize, wants to bring us together. One of the, I think, deepest ways of bringing people together is emotional understanding. You know, have you ever been mad at someone and then, you know, they kind of crack a little bit and they say, like, oh, I just wasn't feeling heard. Like, I'm just not feeling seen by you. And it kind of cracks you open, because you're like, oh, I was so mad at them. But now the fact that I know how they're feeling, I empathize with them. And that kind of cracks the conflict and brings you to more harmony. So I think there's something like that, like the power of empathy helping crack the sort of tension-filled environment around this new moon. And hopefully the seed being planted, you know, it is kind of like a new beginning that is planted at the end of conflict. Like, we can finally move on because we empathized with each other, hopefully.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And I don't know if this is like the best new moon for like planting a bunch of new seeds. It feels more like a closure new moon. Like I can move on,
Mm.
after some kind of resolution.
Yeah,
Yeah.
especially with that Mars-Pluto opposition as well,
Yeah.
happening just before. And also, there are only like maybe 2-3 days until Venus enters Aries on April 30th, and then more or less straight away has a conjunction with Neptune.
Yes. Yes.
So that theme continues, like all those meetings that happened with the North Node and with Saturn now are coming into a new fiery sign and with Neptune.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Mm-hmm.
a really kind of wonky time.
Yeah.
It's not straightforward. I
Oh,
would say the middle of the month is pretty like, okay, let's go, let's get things on the road and da 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 da, because there's so much, all the planets direct, which hasn't happened since a while. But then this is kind of getting a little bit murkied out and slowed down with that Neptune context of all the planets moving through Aries then.
yeah. This is almost reminding me like just the concentrated intensity
Mm.
of like the transits happening at the end of Pisces, beginning of Aries. It's almost reminding me of like 2020, 2021, when everything was happening at the end of Capricorn.
Yeah,
And we were all like, please, God, like, please, everything get out of Capricorn, right? Like there was just so much concentrated energy in
yeah,
that kind of part. It feels not quite as bad and not quite as long, but it feels similar. Like it can be exhausting sometimes to have so much concentrated energy
yeah,
in just one part of your chart, like
yeah,
digging in like
yeah.
over and over again. So
Yeah, I mean the Pisces, and I feel also, I mean, we know that the neighboring signs are not necessarily friends. There's always frictions between the neighboring signs, and I feel that the most friction there is between Pisces and Aries, just because the nature of the archetypes are so different and they want so different things. So that will be really kind of interesting how you experience that. But again, I mean, right now we're still in the middle of eclipses, and these eclipses are like this, end of March eclipse is happening as well in Aries. So really, really need to be very gentle with ourselves. We really, really need to slow down and like not take on too much. Although I feel that April, everybody is gonna, you know, go for what they wanted to go. But there will be still like hiccups on the road. It's not a straightforward month.
mm-mm, mm-mm. Yeah, I like that. I like that as our ending sentiments. And one more thing that comes to mind too on the topic of Pisces energy and Aries energy kind of being hard to integrate. I think about the tarot and how the final card of the Fool's Journey is the World, and then the beginning card is the Fool. So it's kind of like, how do we get from the world to the Fool? Because it's a cycle and it all goes in
Mhm.
a circle. So we
Yeah,
will have to get from the world to the Fool or from Pisces to Aries. But that jump from the world to the Fool brings us into some liminal space, that's hard sometimes to integrate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
with you on that.
Yeah. Well, awesome. It was so good to do the spark notes of the month. I loved this. I loved what we got into. And Anja, of course, I'll have your stuff in the show notes, but just tell us a little bit where we can find you on like Instagram and YouTube and all of that.
Yeah, so my website is brooklynastrology.com and my Instagram handle as well. So I'm there regularly to post about either the energies of the day or some astrocartography magic. And yeah, I hope to see you again somewhere in the big white net.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And I know we'll run into each other all over the world, probably.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, guys, happy April, and feel free to comment below too if you're watching on YouTube and let us know how your month is going. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.
Bye bye.